That night he left his wife at home, ashamed to be seen with her. He told the driver not to wait for her. He straightened his tie in the mirror and did not look at her once. A few hours later, she walked into the same room he'd left her out of. And 300 of the most powerful people in Japan rose to their feet. Not for him, for her. A man should always know who made him. This one had forgotten. Before we go on, let me tell you where this ends, because it's why you clicked. A mafia boss brings his young mistress to the biggest night of the year. He leaves his quiet wife at home like an old coat. He thinks he built everything he has. He is about to learn, in front of everyone, exactly who built it. And it was never him. If you want to see the moment his whole world turns over, subscribe now and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I read every single one. Now, let me tell you about Aya. To her husband, she was an embarrassment. Plain, he called her. Boring, she wore simple clothes. She liked her garden and her books. She did not laugh loud at parties or hang on anyone's arm. Beside the glittering world he thought he ruled, she looked like a woman who didn't belong in it. He had it exactly backwards. He was the one who didn't belong. She had simply let him think otherwise for 12 years. Here is the truth he'd forgotten. Aya was not a girl he'd rescued from nowhere. She was the heir of the oldest family in that world. Her grandfather was the real power. The quiet, ancient power that every boss in the city answered to, whether they knew his face or not. And 12 years earlier, that old man had looked at a sharp, hungry, low-born young man named Daichi and made a decision. He gave Daichi his granddaughter, and with her, a place at the table, a branch to run, protection no money could buy. Daichi rose fast after that. He got good at it, he got rich. And somewhere in the climbing he began to believe he had climbed alone. He forgot the hand that lifted him. Worse, he grew ashamed of it. The hand was Aya. She never corrected him. That was the thing about her that the loud people never understood. She had nothing to prove, so she proved nothing. She let him take the credit. She let him have the spotlight. She stood in the back and made sure the machine ran, and asked for none of the shine. It hadn't always been shine. In the early years he was raw. He knew the streets and nothing else. It was Aya who taught him the rest. Which fork? Which words? When to speak and when to let silence do the work. She read every deal before he signed it. She caught the traps he couldn't see. A rival once set a clever one for him, buried in a contract. Aya found it in an afternoon, over tea, without seeming to try. She never told him it was her. She let him think he'd caught it himself. He walked into that meeting sure of his own genius. He walked out alive because of hers. That was the pattern for 12 years. He shone. She kept him breathing, and slowly, terribly, he came to believe the light was his own. Her kindness was not for show, either. The driver's daughter got sick one winter. Aya paid the hospital quietly and never once mentioned it. The old cook's husband died, and Aya sat with her through the whole night, saying almost nothing, just there. She remembered the names of everyone's children. She asked about them, and she listened to the answers. This is why the house loved her and feared for her. They had each, at one time or another, been seen by her when no one else bothered. A person like that you protect. A person like that you would bow to in a heartbeat if the world ever gave you the chance. And this is how he repaid her. Her name was Rena, 26, bright, hungry the way Daichi used to be. He met her at a club and something in him, something small, decided she was the life he deserved. She was everything Aya wasn't. She laughed loud. She dressed to be looked at. She made him feel young and enormous. He started coming home late. Then, not at all. The staff saw it. The staff loved Aya. They had watched her be gentle with every one of them for years. The old cook wanted to say something. The driver wanted to say something. Aya told them, softly, to leave it be. "He'll remember himself," she said. "Or he won't. Either way, it isn't yours to carry." She was kinder about it than he deserved. There was a dinner, months before, that the staff still talked about. Daiichi's associates and their wives at his own table. Aya had cooked for it herself, the old way, for 3 days. When the guests arrived, Daiichi introduced everyone in the room. He skipped her, his own wife. He waved a hand at the food and said the caterers had done well. A caterer. In her own home. Aya poured the tea and said nothing. She smiled. She refilled every cup, but the old cook saw her hands shake once, just once, in the kitchen afterward. It was the only time anyone ever saw it. Then, it was gone. She carried the plates back out with a steady hand. Then came the gala. Once a year, the whole world of families gathered in one ballroom, old power and new. It was the single most important night in that life. Alliances were made there. Respect was measured there. Where you sat, who bowed to you, who you arrived with. All of it was read like a ledger by everyone in the room. Daiichi decided to bring Rina. He decided it the way arrogant men decide things, as if the world had no memory. He would walk in with the beautiful young woman on his arm and let the room see the man he'd become. And he would leave the plain wife at home, because she embarrassed him, and because he'd forgotten she was ever anything but a habit. What he did not know, what he had somehow let himself forget across 12 soft years, was whose gala it was. The night of, he dressed in the front room. Aya came in quietly, already in a simple dark dress, and asked if she should ride with him. He laughed, not kindly. "You'd be bored," he said. "It's not your kind of thing. Stay home, read one of your books." He looked at her plain dress and something curled at the corner of his mouth. "Honestly, Aya, look at you. I can't walk in with that. That, not her. That." She stood very still. 12 years, and he'd finally said the whole thing out loud. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just nodded once, slowly, and watched him fix his tie in the mirror without once turning around to see her face. "All right," she said softly. "Go on then." He went. Rina was waiting in the car, in red, glowing, the door shut. The engine took them off into the Tokyo night, and Aya stood alone in the big quiet house he'd built on her family's name. She stood there a long moment. She thought about the girl she'd been, the one who believed a quiet love could soften a hard man. She thought about 12 years of being made small in her own house. And she decided, standing alone in that big quiet room, that she was done being ashamed of herself for someone else's shame. Then she went to make a phone call. One call to an old man who had been waiting 12 years for her to finally make it. The old man had watched all of it from a distance. He saw more than anyone knew. He had wanted many times to end Daiichi years ago. Aya asked him not to. "Let him choose," she'd say. "A man shows you who he is, if you give him enough rope and enough years." So the old man waited. Because she asked, because he loved her more than he loved his own pride, which for a man like him was the rarest thing he had to give. What Daiichi never understood was that his leash had been in Aya's hand the whole time. She had only ever needed to let go of it. For 12 years, out of something like hope, she didn't. Meanwhile, across the city, the gala had begun. Daiichi arrived like a king. He walked in with Rena on his arm and felt the room turn to look, and mistook the looking for admiration. People were looking, yes, but not the way he thought. The older family saw the young woman in red where the wife should be, at this gala of all galas, and something cold moved through them. In their world, the woman you bring says who you are, and what Daichi had just said, without knowing it, was an insult aimed at the most dangerous family in the room. Rena loved it. She thought the stares were for her beauty. She laughed loud. She drank the expensive things. She hung on Daichi's arm and felt, for 1 hour, like she had won an entire life. What she had actually done was walk into a trap she couldn't see on the arm of the man who'd built it himself. Brick by brick. Over 12 years. For that 1 hour, Daichi was the man he'd always wanted to be. What neither of them knew was that the old man at the head of the room, the ancient one everyone quietly deferred to, the one even Daichi bowed to without fully knowing why, was watching the door. Waiting, he had gotten a phone call an hour earlier. He had said only 3 words into it. Come, then, finally, and he had been watching the door ever since. At 9 o'clock, the door opened, and Aya walked in. She had changed. Not into anything loud, into a formal kimono, dark and perfect, the kind that takes an hour to put on and says everything without a single word. Her hair was up, her back was straight. She walked in alone, and she walked in the way a person walks into a room that has always, secretly, belonged to them. The room saw her, and the room began to bow. It started at the front, near the old man, and it moved outward like a wave. The oldest, most powerful people in that ballroom lowered their heads to the quiet woman in the doorway. Then, the ones behind them, who bowed because their betters were bowing. Then, everyone. 300 people, bowing to Aya. Daichi turned to see what everyone was looking at, and the blood left his face. He watched his wife, the plain one, the boring one, the one he could not walk in with, cross the most important room in the country while the whole of it bent toward her. He watched the old man he feared rise from his seat. He had never once, in 12 years, seen that man rise for anyone. The old man rose for Aya. "Grandfather," she said, and bowed to him, the only person in the room she owed a bow to. The word landed in the silence like a stone in still water. "Grandfather," the rings spread out across the room, face by face, as 300 people did the same math at the same time and arrived at the same answer. The old man was the power. Aya was his heir. And the man in the fine suit with the young woman in red on his arm, the man who ran a branch and thought he ran the world, held everything he had because this family had handed it to him, and he had just spat on it in front of everyone who mattered. Rena felt the change before she understood it. The arm she was holding had gone rigid. The room that had felt like a party now felt like a courtroom. She looked at Daichi's gray face and, being no one's fool, quietly let go of his arm and took 1 step away from him. Then, another. In this world, you do not want to be standing next to the man the family has decided to erase. Daichi crossed to Aya, fast, low, his voice a whisper now. "Aya, you never told me your grandfather was. You never asked," she said. "Quiet, even in 12 years, Daichi. You never once asked me who I was. You only ever told me who I wasn't." The old man's voice cut across the room. Soft, which was worse than loud. "You left my granddaughter at home," he said, "and brought that to my table." He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Everything you have, because I gave it to her, and she chose to share it with you. That was her gift. It was never your right." Daichi went to his knees on the floor of the ballroom. In front of 300 people. In front of the young woman who was already at the coat check, he bowed his head all the way down. The deep bow. The one that means true shame. The one he had made his wife feel 1,000 small times without ever once offering it himself. "Please," he said into the floor. Aya looked down at him for a moment. She was not cruel. That was the difference between them, and it had always been the difference. She did not gloat. She did not crush him with a word, though she could have ended him with one, and everyone in that room knew it. "Stand up," she said. "You're embarrassing the family." And that, being told to stand because his shame was staining her name, was the last thing left to take from him. He stood. She turned and walked to her grandfather's side and took the seat that had been empty beside him for 12 years, the seat that had always been hers, and the room settled around her like it had been waiting all night to breathe. Daichi kept his branch, for a while. On a leash now. Everyone knew what he was. A borrowed suit. A man who'd been handed a life and was too small to know he was holding it. Rena was gone by the next morning, off to find a man whose power wasn't on loan. He deserved the quiet that came after. It was the quiet of a man nobody feared anymore. The last part is small, and it's the part that stays with me. Aya went home that night and sat in her garden, alone, in the dark, and she was lighter than she'd been in years. The old cook brought her tea without being asked. The driver waited by the gate in case she needed anything, though it was long past his hours. These were the people who had always seen her. She had never needed a ballroom to bow. She'd had them the whole time. She'd just forgotten to let herself be held by it. The city told the story wrong afterward, of course. They said a powerful man's wife turned out to be somebody. Daichi probably tells it that way still, if he tells it at all. But that's not what happened, and you watched it, so you know. A man was handed everything by a quiet woman and grew ashamed of the hand that gave it. He mistook her silence for smallness. He mistook her kindness for weakness. And he never once understood that the reason no one crossed him was her, standing behind him the whole time, asking for none of the credit. The people who make you rarely announce it. They don't need to. They know what they did. Real power never has to raise its voice, and the day it finally speaks, everyone in the room already knows to be quiet. Never be ashamed of the person holding you up. One day they might just stop. If that hit you, tell me the exact moment you knew he'd lost everything. The phone call, the bow, or stand up. You're embarrassing the family. Put it in the comments. Share this with anyone who was ever made to feel small by the person who should have known them best. And if you want the story of how a low-born man was chosen by the oldest family in Japan, and the deal Aya's grandfather made 12 years ago, vote for part 2 below, and I'll tell you everything.